The photograph hadn't been taken yet. And somehow Evan already knew he wasn't going to like what it showed. The old camera rested on his kitchen table like it had been waiting for him, not for days, not for years, for decades. Rain hammered against the apartment windows, turning the city outside into a blur of yellow lights and blue-gray shadows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky, slow and heavy. The apartment smelled of cardboard, old paper and fresh coffee. 3 days earlier, Evan Miller had buried the last member of his family, his grandfather, Arthur Miller. The funeral had been small. Just a priest, 2 distant relatives Evan had never met, and the sound of rain falling on polished wood. Arthur had lived alone for almost 20 years after Evan's grandmother died. He rarely answered the phone. He rarely left the house. People in the neighborhood called him eccentric. Children called him the old man with the cameras. Every room in his house had been filled with photographs. Thousands of them, mountains, roads, Emily streets, old buildings, trees disappearing into fog. Almost none of them contained people. As a child, Evan had once asked why. Arthur had smiled without looking away from the photograph he was holding. Places remember longer than people do. At the time, Evan thought it was just another one of his grandfather's strange sayings. Now he wasn't so sure. The cardboard box had arrived that afternoon. No return address. Only Evan's name written across the top in shaky black ink. The lawyer said it had been prepared years before Arthur died. Inside were only 4 things: a worn leather camera bag, 3 unopened packs of instant film, a brass key without a label, and a folded yellow envelope. The envelope was addressed simply, "For Evan." He opened it expecting one last sentimental letter. Instead, he found only a single sentence, written carefully, almost painfully slowly. Never take more than 1 photograph after midnight. Nothing else. No explanation, no goodbye, no signature. Evan read it twice before letting out a quiet laugh. Still trying to scare me, he shook his head. Some things never changed. Arthur had loved mysteries more than answers. The camera itself was beautiful, old heavy. Its black leather was cracked with age, but every metal part had been polished until it shone. On the front, engraved beneath the lens, were 2 words: "The Witness." Not a company logo, not a model number. Just "The Witness." Evan frowned. He searched the body of the camera. No manufacturer, no serial number, nothing. Only those 2 words. He turned it over. The back opened with a soft metallic click. Inside, someone had carefully carved another sentence into the metal, so small he almost missed it. "It only remembers what has already chosen you." A chill crept slowly across his shoulders. He closed the camera immediately. Okay, that's creepy. Outside, the rain became heavier. The lights flickered once, then again. The apartment suddenly felt much quieter than before. Evan glanced toward the clock above the stove. 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes until midnight. He looked back at the camera. The yellow envelope still lay beside it. Never take more than 1 photograph after midnight. He smiled to himself. His grandfather had probably hidden a voice recorder inside, or maybe the film produced fake images as part of some elaborate prank. Arthur had loved practical jokes almost as much as photography. There had to be an explanation. There always was. He opened one of the film packs. The wrapper crumbled slightly in his hands. Old, very old, yet somehow still sealed. He loaded it into the camera. The mechanism accepted it with a satisfying mechanical click. It sounded alive. Midnight. The digital clock changed silently. 12 a.m. For a brief second the apartment lights dimmed, not enough to go dark, just enough for Evan to notice. He looked around. Nothing, only rain. Only thunder, only the camera waiting in his hands. He walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, the street below was empty. A lonely bus stop, a broken streetlight buzzing faintly, water flowing through the gutters. No people, no cars, no movement. Perfect. He lifted the camera, looked through the viewfinder. Everything seemed normal. His finger rested on the shutter button. Why was he hesitating? It was only a photograph, nothing more. He laughed nervously, then pressed the button. The flash exploded like lightning. White light filled the kitchen. For an instant Evan saw his own reflection in the glass, but something felt wrong. The reflection looked delayed, almost as if it blinked after he did. The feeling disappeared before he could understand it. The camera clicked, whirred softly. Then a photograph slowly emerged from the front. Warm, fresh, completely blank. He placed it carefully on the table. Rain tapped against the window. Seconds passed. Gray shapes appeared. Road, street, bus stop, street lamp. Exactly what he had photographed. Then a vehicle appeared, white, long emergency lights. An ambulance. Evan leaned closer, his heartbeat quickened. The ambulance wasn't alone. Two paramedics stood beside its open rear doors, near the sidewalk. Someone lay beneath a white sheet, his mouth went dry. He rushed to the window outside. Nothing, no ambulance, no lights, no people, only rain, only darkness. He looked back down. The photograph had finished developing at the bottom of the white border. Black letters slowly appeared, not printed, developing as if the photograph itself were writing them. Tomorrow. Evan stared at the word for several seconds, then he whispered something he would remember for the rest of his life. That's impossible. Outside, somewhere far down the empty street, an ambulance siren echoed through the rain. The ambulance siren lasted only a few seconds, then it faded into the rain, not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply disappeared, as if the city had swallowed it whole. Evan stood in the middle of his kitchen, unable to move. The old camera rested quietly on the table, beside it lay the photograph, the ambulance, the two paramedics, the white sheet covering a motionless body. Outside, there was nothing, an empty street, rain falling beneath a flickering streetlight, the abandoned bus stop silence. Evan picked up the photograph once more. It had already grown cold. The word at the bottom remained perfectly clear. Tomorrow. He turned it over. The back was blank, no hidden message, no trick, no explanation. This has to be some kind of joke. His own voice sounded weak, even to himself. He looked out the window again. The street remained exactly as it had been all night, empty, still almost peaceful, and somehow that frightened him even more. Slade never came. Every time Evan closed his eyes, he saw the same white sheet lying on the rain-soaked sidewalk, not the body, not blood, not death itself, just the outline beneath the fabric. At 2:17 a.m., he walked back into the kitchen. The street was empty. At 3:04 a.m., he checked again, still empty. At 4:36 a.m., he sat at the kitchen table with his grandfather's note in his hands. Never take more than one photograph after midnight. He had followed the rule, exactly one photograph, nothing more. So why did it feel like he had already broken something far more important? Something Arthur had never written down. Just after 5 in the morning, exhaustion finally won. Evan fell asleep, sitting at the kitchen table. He woke to the sound of rain. Gray morning light filled the apartment. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then he heard the siren, closer this time, much closer. His eyes snapped open. The chair crashed onto the floor as he jumped to his feet. He rushed to the window. His heart stopped. The ambulance was there. Exactly where it had appeared in the photograph. Its rear doors stood open. Two paramedics were speaking quietly near the entrance. Several neighbors had gathered beneath umbrellas, and lying on the wet sidewalk covered by a white sheet was a body. Every detail matched. The broken street lamp, the puddle reflecting yellow light, the position of the ambulance, even the angle of the open rear doors. The photograph hadn't predicted the future, it had remembered it before it happened. The building's group chat quickly filled with messages. Harold Bennett, 68 years old, first floor, lived alone, possibly a heart attack. Nobody knew for certain. Evan had spoken to the old man only once, a polite nod in the hallway, nothing more. Now an entire life had been reduced to a few messages on a phone screen. He placed the phone face down. Work didn't matter today. He called in sick. Technically he wasn't lying. The photograph never changed. Evan expected it to fade, to disappear, to become blank once reality had caught up with it. Instead, it remained exactly the same, a perfect image of tomorrow, now transformed into yesterday. By evening, he had accepted two impossible truths. First, what had happened could not exist. Second, it had happened anyway, which meant there was only one thing left to do: test it again. This time, he was careful, not after midnight, not a person. Just a place. At exactly 8:32 p.m., Evan stood at the kitchen window once more. Across the street sat the old bus stop. Emily bench, metal sign, rainwater collecting beneath the streetlight, an ordinary scene. Safe. He loaded another sheet of film. His hands trembled slightly. "This is just an experiment," he whispered. The flash lit the glass. The camera clicked softly. A fresh photograph slid into his hand. He laid it carefully on the table. Gray shadows appeared. Then the bus stop, the bench, the puddle, and finally, someone, a woman. She sat alone beneath the shelter. Long dark hair covered her face. She wore an old black coat. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. The street around her was completely empty. Slowly letters appeared along the white border. Tomorrow. Evan stared at the photograph for nearly a minute. Fear was still there, but something else had begun to replace it, curiosity. The following evening he waited. At exactly 8:30 p.m., he stood behind the kitchen window, the photograph in one hand. The bus stop looked exactly as it always had. Rain Dullo light, Emily bench. 8:31, nothing. 8:32, a figure emerged from the rain at the far end of the street. Evan stopped breathing. The woman walked slowly, no umbrella, no hurry. She reached the bus stop, looked briefly down the empty road, then sat on the bench, exactly as the photograph had shown, head lowered, hands folded, dark coat. For 10 long minutes, she never moved. No bus arrived, no cars stopped, no one spoke to her. At 8:44, she slowly stood, then she turned toward Evan's apartment building. For a single heartbeat he was certain she was looking directly into his window. He instinctively stepped backward into the darkness of his kitchen. When he looked again, she was gone, the bench was empty, the photograph had been right again. The next morning, Evan bought a notebook, cheap black cover. On the first page he wrote, "The witness, observations." Then he began keeping records. Date, time, location, subject, result. He photographed the alley behind his apartment building. The next day, a soaked black dog appeared exactly where the photograph had shown. He photographed Mercer Street Bridge. The following afternoon, police closed it after an abandoned car blocked the center lane. He photographed the abandoned movie theater downtown. The next evening, one broken letter on the old neon sign suddenly flickered back to life. For exactly 6 minutes, every prediction came true, not symbolically, perfectly. With each successful photograph Evan became less afraid, and that was the most dangerous thing of all, because fear given enough time can slowly begin to feel like understanding, and understanding can become obsession. For the first time, Evan wondered if the camera could actually help people. Prevent accidents, save lives. Perhaps Arthur had misunderstood it, perhaps he had simply been afraid. That night, Evan wrote one final sentence beneath his notes. "The camera doesn't create the future." He paused, then added another line, "At least I don't think it does." On Thursday evening, he photographed his own mailbox. Nothing unusual, just a white envelope inside. The next afternoon at exactly 3:15 p.m., the envelope was there. No stamp, no return address, only his name, written in black ink. He carried it upstairs, locked the apartment door, opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, not one he had taken. It showed his kitchen table. The witness lay in the center. Beside it rested his notebook. Across the open page someone had written 4 simple words. "You are not the first." Evan felt every muscle in his body tighten. He searched the apartment, every room, every closet. The front door was locked, the windows were locked, nothing had been disturbed. Yet someone had stood inside his kitchen, someone had photographed his table, someone knew about the camera, or something did. Slowly Evan turned toward the witness. It sat exactly where he had left it, silent, motionless. Watching for the first time he realized its name had never been symbolic. It wasn't simply showing the future. It was witnessing it. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a room someone else had already visited. Evan stood motionless in the center of the kitchen. The photograph still lay on the table. "You are not the first." He read the words again, then again. They refused to lose their meaning. Who had written them? Who had entered his apartment? Or who had known what would happen before it happened? The silence inside the room became unbearable. For the first time since inheriting the camera, Evan picked it up not with curiosity, but with caution. He placed it under the bright kitchen light and studied every inch of its worn black body, the cracked leather, the polished lens, the heavy metal frame. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing except its name. Thweet-ness. He whispered the words aloud. The witness. Why would anyone call a camera that? A witness didn't create events. A witness simply watched, remembered, recorded. The thought sent another chill through his body. There had to be something Arthur had hidden, something he hadn't found yet. Evan emptied the leather bag onto the kitchen table. Old receipts, a faded cleaning cloth, several unopened film packs. Nothing. He searched every pocket again. Still nothing. Frustrated, he turned the bag upside down and shook it harder. Something small struck the wooden table, a brass key. The same unlabeled key Arthur had left inside the box. Evan frowned. He had completely forgotten about it. It wasn't a house key, too small, too old. the teeth were unlike any modern lock. Attached to it was a tiny metal tag, so worn that only one word remained visible: Arkbead. The next morning, Evan returned to his grandfather's house. The lawyer had already handed him the keys. The place was exactly as Arthur had left it. The grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped at 3:17. Dust floated lazily through narrow beams of sunlight. Nothing had moved, nothing had been touched. The house felt less abandoned than paused, as if it were waiting for someone to continue a conversation interrupted years ago. Evan wandered from room to room. Every wall was covered with photographs: forests, roads, merely train stations, rain, fog, streetlights, thousands of images, and still almost no people. His grandfather had spent a lifetime photographing places instead of faces. Back then it had seemed strange. Now it felt deliberate. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, locked. Evan tried the handle anyway. Nothing. His eyes dropped to the brass key in his hand. For a moment he hesitated. Arthur had never allowed anyone into the basement. Not even family, especially not family. "You'll understand one day," he used to say. Evan never imagined that day would actually come. He slid the key into the old lock. It fit perfectly. The mechanism turned with a deep metallic click. The door opened by itself. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. The basement smelled of old paper machine oil, and something else, something damp, almost like earth after rain. The light switch didn't work. Evan used the flashlight on his phone. Wooden stairs disappeared into darkness. Each step creaked beneath his weight. The beam swept slowly across the room. Shelves, boxes, cabinets, photography equipment, hundreds of carefully labeled envelopes, and at the far end of the basement, a steel filing cabinet. Unlike everything else in the room, it had no dust. Someone had opened it recently. The brass key fit again. Inside, there were no documents, only photographs, hundreds of them, each one sealed inside transparent sleeves. Each one dated, years, decades. Evan pulled one at random: a quiet country road, heavy fog, an old pickup truck, across the bottom the familiar word: tomorrow. Another photograph: a hospital corridor, tomorrow. Another: a church, tomorrow. Another: a playground, tomorrow. Every photograph looked exactly like those produced by his own camera. Arthur hadn't taken dozens, he had taken hundreds, maybe thousands. For how many years? How many tomorrows had he seen? At the very bottom of the cabinet lay a thick black journal. Its leather cover was cracked with age. Across the front, in Arthur's handwriting, were 4 words: Witness Log, Volume 4, Volume 4. Evan's pulse quickened. Slowly, he opened the journal. The first pages contained dates, photograph numbers, locations, short observations, exactly like the notebook Evan himself had started only yesterday. His stomach tightened. Arthur had kept the same records, page after page, year after year. Then halfway through the journal the handwriting suddenly changed. The ink looked older, the letters sharper. At the top of the page was a single sentence: Owner number 3. Evan frowned. He turned back a few pages. Owner number 2. Further back, Owner number 1. His hands became cold. Arthur hadn't been the first owner, he hadn't even been the second. The camera had belonged to others long before it reached him, and Arthur had been keeping track of every single one. Near the back of the journal, an envelope had been tucked between 2 pages. It bore Evan's name. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. Arthur's handwriting was weaker now, almost shaky. Evan, if you're reading this, you've already made the same mistake I did. You believe the camera predicts the future. It doesn't. Evan's breath caught. He continued reading. It only shows a single moment without telling you why it happened, and that is how it traps you. Rain began tapping softly against the basement window. Evan read the final paragraph twice. If you want answers, find Samuel Grayson. He repaired the camera once. If anyone still understands the witness, it's him. Below the signature Arthur had written one final line, so faint it was almost invisible: Don't let the camera choose what you fear. Evan slowly lowered the letter. For the first time he wasn't thinking about the photographs, he was thinking about Arthur. His grandfather hadn't spent 30 years hiding from the camera. He had spent 30 years trying to understand it, and judging by the fear in his final letter, he never truly had. The rain had not stopped for 4 straight days. By the time Evan stepped out of his grandfather's house, the clouds hung so low they seemed to rest on the rooftops. He unfolded the worn piece of paper one more time. There was only one address written in Arthur's fading handwriting: Samuel Grayson. Grayson Camera Repair, 214 Willow Street. He searched the name on his phone. No website, no phone number, no business hours, only an old map listing. Permanently closed. Evan stared at the screen for a moment. If Arthur hadn't written the address himself, he never would have gone. The repair shop stood at the edge of the oldest part of town, a narrow brick building squeezed between two abandoned storefronts. The faded sign above the door had almost lost its lettering. Behind the dusty display window sat dozens of old cameras, untouched for years. The place looked forgotten, as if time itself had walked past without noticing it. Evan was about to turn around when a voice broke the silence. "If you're looking for film, you're too late." Evan spun around. An elderly man stood beneath the shop's awning. His silver hair was damp from the rain. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane. His pale gray eyes studied Evan with unsettling calm. "Mr. Grayson?" The old man didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the worn leather camera bag hanging from Evan's shoulder. For a brief second the color drained from his face. He recognized it, not the bag, the camera inside it. He sighed. So it finally found another owner. The bell above the door rang softly as they entered the shop. The smell hit Evan immediately: machine oil, old wood, dust, and the faint chemical scent of photographic developer. The workshop hadn't changed in decades. Half-repaired cameras covered every shelf. Tiny springs, gears and lenses lay scattered across the workbench. Samuel closed the door behind them. For nearly a minute neither man spoke. Finally, Samuel nodded toward the leather case. "Show me." Evan carefully placed the camera on the workbench. The old repairman didn't touch it. He simply stared long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then he whispered, "I hoped I'd never see you again." Evan frowned. "You know this camera?" Samuel gave a tired smile. "Young man, I repaired it 40 years ago, and it was already older than I was." The room fell silent again. Samuel lowered himself into an old wooden chair. His hands trembled slightly. "What was your grandfather's name?" "Arthur Miller." Samuel closed his eyes. "I thought so." For several seconds, he said nothing. When he finally looked up again, his expression had changed, not surprise, recognition. "So, you're the fourth." A cold knot tightened in Evan's stomach. "The fourth what?" Samuel stood slowly and walked toward a dusty bookshelf. From the highest shelf, he removed a worn black ledger. Its leather cover was cracked with age. He opened it carefully. The first page contained only 3 names: Daniel Harper 1978, Elizabeth Shaw 1991, Arthur Miller. Mine 96. Beneath Arthur's name there was an empty space. Samuel uncapped an old fountain pen. Without asking permission he wrote, "Evan Miller, 2026, he closed the book. There. Now it's complete. Evan stared at his own name. His throat suddenly felt dry. "Who are they, the owners? What happened to them?" Samuel looked toward the rain-covered window. His answer came quietly. "They all died." The room seemed to grow colder. Evan swallowed. "The camera killed them?" Samuel shook his head. "No, they died because of the choices they made after they believed they understood what the photographs meant." Evan stared at him in confusion. Samuel noticed. "You believe the camera predicts the future?" "It does." "No, it doesn't." Evan frowned. "I've watched every photograph come true." Samuel nodded. "I know, but that's not what it does." He leaned forward. "The witness never shows the future. It shows a single moment. Nothing more. No beginning, no ending. No explanation. It gives you one frame, and lets your own fear invent the rest." Samuel walked to a filing cabinet and removed an old photograph. The edges had faded yellow with age. He handed it to Evan. A man stood on the edge of a bridge. Dark water rushed beneath him. At the bottom the familiar word, "Tomorrow." "Daniel Harper." Samuel spoke softly. He saw this photograph. He became convinced he would jump from that bridge the next day. So he avoided it. He drove across town, took different roads, refused to go anywhere near the river. Samuel paused. The next afternoon his car broke down. The nearest repair shop was on the other side of the bridge. He had no choice. He walked. Evan looked back at the photograph. "What happened?" Samuel smiled sadly. When he reached the bridge, he saw a little girl climbing over the railing. He ran. He grabbed her before she fell. For a brief moment, he stood exactly where the photograph had shown him. The camera never lied. It simply never told him why. Samuel returned the photograph to the cabinet. Then he removed another. A woman cried beside a hospital bed. "Tomorrow." Elizabeth Shaw. She believed the patient was her son. She spent the entire night in panic. The next morning she rushed to the hospital. Samuel looked at Evan. Her son was perfectly healthy. It wasn't him. It was her mother. The witness hadn't shown a tragedy. It had shown grief. Elizabeth supplied the wrong story. The room became quiet once more. Samuel folded his hands. Your first photograph. The ambulance. You thought it meant your death. Evan nodded slowly. But someone else died, yes. The photograph wasn't wrong. Samuel's voice became almost gentle. You were. The old repairman stood. He walked back to the workbench again. He stopped just short of touching the camera, almost as if he feared it might respond. He looked directly into Evan's eyes. Listen carefully. This is the only lesson that matters. Thunder rolled outside. Samuel waited until the sound faded. Then he spoke. The witness never lies. He paused long enough for the words to settle. But it never tells the whole truth. Evan felt something inside him shift. Every photograph, every conclusion, every fear. Had he misunderstood all of them? Had the danger never been the camera, but the stories he had invented to explain its images? Evan picked up the leather case. He was halfway to the door when Samuel spoke again. Wait. Evan turned. The old man wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the witness. His face had gone pale. It already showed you the grave, didn't it? Evan hesitated, then nodded. Yes, the grave was open? Yes. Samuel closed his eyes. For the first time since they'd met he looked genuinely afraid. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Then it's happening sooner than I hoped. Evan's pulse quickened. What does that mean? Samuel slowly opened his eyes. It means the camera is running out of patience. Evan frowned. I don't understand. The old man looked at him with a sadness that felt older than the building around them. You will. Because soon it won't wait for you to press the shutter anymore. Evan drove home in complete silence. The windshield wipers swept rhythmically across the glass, pushing away sheets of rain that seemed determined to erase the road ahead. He couldn't stop hearing Samuel's words. The witness never lies, it simply never tells the whole truth. Until that afternoon, Evan had believed the camera was the mystery. Now he realized the mystery had always been himself. His apartment felt strangely unfamiliar, not haunted, not cursed, just different, as if every object inside had quietly moved while he was gone. He placed the leather case on the kitchen table. The witness remained exactly where he had left it inside, silent, patient, waiting. Evan didn't touch it. Instead, he emptied his backpack, Arthur's journal, his own notebook, every photograph. He spread them across the table like pieces of a puzzle. For the first time he wasn't looking for predictions, he was looking for mistakes. The ambulance, he had assumed it meant his death. Instead, it had been Harold Bennett. The woman at the bus stop, he had imagined a ghost, or someone watching him. In reality she had simply been waiting for a bus that never arrived. The bridge, he had expected a terrible accident. Instead police had closed it because of an abandoned vehicle. The abandoned theater. He thought something supernatural would happen. Nothing did. Only one broken neon letter flickered back to life for 6 minutes. Every photograph had been perfectly accurate. Every conclusion had been completely wrong. Evan leaned back in his chair. For the first time in days he laughed, not because anything was funny, because he finally understood why Arthur had spent 30 years writing notes instead of answers. The camera wasn't dangerous because it predicted the future, it was dangerous because people couldn't resist explaining it. That night, Evan made a decision. He would never use the witness again. He wrapped the camera in Arthur's old cleaning cloth, placed it carefully back inside the leather case, locked the case, then carried it into the hallway closet. He placed it on the highest shelf, closed the door, for good, or so he hoped. The next morning something woke him before sunrise, not a sound, a feeling, a strange certainty that someone was standing inside the apartment, watching him. Evan opened his eyes. The bedroom was empty. Gray dawn filtered through the curtains, everything was silent. Then he heard it. A soft mechanical click from the kitchen. His heart began to race. Slowly he climbed out of bed. Another click, then the quiet whirring of gears. He froze. He knew that sound. There was only one thing in the apartment capable of making it, the witness. Evan hurried into the kitchen. The closet door stood open. He was certain he had closed it. The leather case rested on the kitchen table. Open, the camera sat upright in the center, facing the window. A fresh photograph slowly emerged from the front. Evan stopped breathing. He hadn't loaded new film. He hadn't even touched the camera since yesterday. the photograph slid onto the table by itself, warm, perfectly white. The room became impossibly quiet, even the rain outside seemed to disappear. Evan approached slowly. He didn't want to touch it, but he couldn't look away. Gray shadows began to appear, then shapes, then the cemetery. His pulse quickened, the same cemetery, the same iron gate, the same rain-soaked path, then the open grave again, but this time the photograph showed more, much more. Several people stood beneath black umbrellas, a priest, 2 police officers, a coffin, and there standing exactly where he had seen himself before was Evan. Only now he wasn't looking at the grave, he was looking directly toward the camera. His face was pale, his expression wasn't frightened, it was resigned, almost as if he already knew someone was watching him. Slowly letters appeared beneath the image. Not tomorrow. Not this time. Instead, only 3 words, don't be late. Evan stared at the message, his throat tightened. Samuel had been right. The witness hadn't waited for him to press the shutter, it had chosen the moment itself, and for the first time the camera hadn't shown tomorrow. It had given him an instruction. Evan reached toward the photograph. Before his fingers touched it, the telephone rang. The sound shattered the silence. He jumped. The old landline on the kitchen wall hadn't rung in years, almost no one even knew the number. It rang again, and again. Finally he picked it up. This is Evan. For several seconds only static answered. Then a quiet voice spoke, an old man's voice, weak, calm, almost familiar. She's awake now. The line went dead. Evan remained frozen, his hands still gripping the receiver, his breathing shallow. Slowly, very slowly he turned toward the witness. The camera was no longer facing the window, it was facing him. Evan barely slept. The photograph lay on the kitchen table exactly where it had emerged that morning. He had read the message so many times that the words had begun to lose their meaning. Don't be late. It wasn't a prediction, it wasn't a warning, it sounded like an invitation. The thought unsettled him more than any photograph ever had. Just after sunrise, he drove back to the old repair shop. The rain had finally eased, leaving the streets wrapped in a pale gray mist. The faded sign above the entrance swayed gently in the wind. Samuel Grayson was already inside. He looked up as the bell above the door rang. You came back. I had to. Samuel nodded. Without another word, Evan placed the latest photograph on the workbench. The old repairman stared at it for a long time. His weathered face revealed nothing at first, then his shoulders slowly dropped. So, it has begun. Evan frowned. What has begun? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully slid the photograph closer to himself. His fingers stopped just short of touching it. He never touched the photographs. Evan noticed that for the first time. You asked me yesterday where the witness came from. Yes, I don't know. The answer caught Evan completely off guard. Samuel smiled sadly. Neither does anyone else. He walked toward an old filing cabinet and removed a thick folder. Its pages were yellow with age. Every sheet contained newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and faded sketches of old cameras. For more than a century, people have tried to explain the witness. He slowly turned the pages. Some believed it was built by a photographer obsessed with capturing tomorrow. Another page, others claimed it was created by a clockmaker who became convinced that time itself could be photographed. Another page. There was even a story that it survived a fire which destroyed an entire photography studio. Samuel closed the folder. None of those stories could ever be proven. He looked directly at Evan. The camera's origin isn't the mystery. The people who own it are. Evan remained silent. Samuel continued. Every owner follows exactly the same path. First, they refuse to believe, then they experiment. They become convinced, they begin searching for patterns. He paused. And eventually, they stop living today. They begin living tomorrow. The words lingered in the quiet workshop. Evan suddenly realized Samuel wasn't describing strangers, he was describing him. Every morning he woke thinking about the next photograph, every evening he waited for tomorrow. He had stopped making plans, stopped calling friends, stopped going to work regularly. His entire life had quietly shifted around a camera. Samuel watched the realization spread across Evan's face. It never steals your life. It convinces you to hand it over. Rain tapped softly against the workshop windows. Samuel walked toward them. Arthur understood that. My grandfather? Eventually, Samuel folded his hands behind his back. For the first 10 years he tried to change everything the photographs showed. The next 10 he only observed, and the last 10? Samuel smiled. He stopped trying to explain them. Evan looked confused. He still took photographs. Yes, but he stopped fearing them. Neither man spoke for several moments. The silence felt strangely peaceful, until click. Both of them froze. The sound had come from the leather case. It lay closed on the workbench. Neither of them had touched it. Another click. Then the familiar mechanical whirs. Samuel took one slow step backward. Don't open it. But before either man could move, a fresh white photograph slowly slid out through the narrow gap in the case. Neither of them breathed. The image developed by itself, gray, then black, then shapes. Not the cemetery, not the grave, not the bus stop. Instead the photograph showed the workshop itself, the very room they were standing in, the old wooden bookshelf, the top shelf, the black folder Samuel had taken down only minutes earlier. A single yellowed page protruded from inside it. As the photograph finished developing, words became visible on that page, large enough to read. Outer number 5. Evan's pulse raced. He looked at Samuel. The old man's face had turned pale. No, he whispered. I hoped it wouldn't happen again. Evan grabbed the photograph. What does this mean? Samuel didn't answer, not immediately. Nearly half a minute passed before he finally spoke. I don't know who the 5th owner will be, but I know something else. What? Samuel looked toward the black folder. When you arrived this morning, that page didn't exist. Without another word, Evan hurried to the bookshelf. He pulled the black folder free. Inside lay the same leather ledger Samuel had shown him the day before. He flipped through it rapidly. Owner 1, Hodder 2, Owner 3, Arthur Miller, Evan Miller. Then one more page, a page he had never seen before. Across the top, fresh black ink, owner number 5. The rest of the page remained completely blank. No name, no date, no photograph, just empty paper. Samuel quietly closed the journal. It always starts this way. Evan swallowed. What starts? The search. The witness is already looking for whoever comes after you. A chill spread through Evan's body. But I'm still alive. Samuel met his eyes. A sorrowful expression crossed the old man's face. I know. He hesitated. And that's exactly what frightens me. As Evan slowly closed the journal, something slipped from between its pages, a folded envelope. The paper looked newer than everything else. Across the front, written in Arthur Miller's unmistakable handwriting, were only 3 words, open tomorrow morning. Evan looked at Samuel. I've never seen this before. Samuel hadn't either. For the first time since they met, the old repairman looked genuinely surprised. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside the workshop, neither man reached for the envelope. Evan didn't open the envelope. Not immediately. He slipped it carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket. For reasons he couldn't explain, it felt wrong to read it inside the repair shop. Samuel noticed. Good. Evan looked at him. You think I shouldn't? The old repairman shook his head. I think Arthur knew exactly when he wanted you to read it. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in days, the silence that followed felt unnatural, as if the entire city had paused, waiting. The drive home was strangely peaceful. No thunder, no sirens, no traffic, only wet streets reflecting the pale afternoon sky. Evan parked outside his apartment building but remained inside the car. His eyes rested on the envelope. Open tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, everything always came back to tomorrow. He almost laughed. The camera had stolen the meaning of the word. Tomorrow was no longer hope, it had become a destination, a place he feared reaching. That night he didn't look at the witness. He locked the leather case inside the hallway closet once again. Then he pushed a heavy suitcase against the door, not because he believed it would stop the camera, but because it made him feel less helpless. He switched off every light in the apartment, closed the curtains, and went to bed. For the first time in a week, sleep came quickly. He dreamed of photographs, thousands of them. They floated through endless darkness like leaves carried by invisible wind. Every photograph showed the same place, the same cemetery, the same open grave. Only one detail changed, the person standing beside it. Sometimes it was Arthur, sometimes Samuel, sometimes complete strangers, old, young, men, women. Every one of them stood in exactly the same place, looking not at the grave, but directly toward whoever was holding the camera. Then one by one they stepped backward, into the darkness beyond the edge of the photograph. Evan tried to call out. No sound came. The last photograph drifted toward him. It showed only empty ground. Across the white border, one word slowly appeared. Today, he woke with a gasp. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains. For the first time in nearly a week, the sky was blue. The storm had finally passed. Evan looked at the clock, about 8:14 a.m. He immediately remembered the envelope. His heart began to pound. He retrieved it from his jacket. The paper felt brittle. Arthur's handwriting looked almost rushed. Unlike every other note he had left, Evan unfolded the letter. Evan, if you've reached this point, the camera has already shown you the grave. I hoped it never would. I was wrong. Evan stopped reading. A cold sensation spread through his chest. He continued. There is something I never told you, not because I wanted to keep a secret, because I was afraid you would spend your life searching for answers instead of living it. That was my mistake, don't repeat it. The next paragraph had been written much more carefully, almost as if Arthur had wanted every word to matter. Every owner believes the grave belongs to them, every owner spends months trying to escape it, every owner fails, because they are running from the wrong thing. Evan's hands tightened around the paper. Arthur continued. The witness never shows death, it shows the moment when you finally understand something. The grave isn't the end, it's only where every owner stops asking the wrong question. Evan stared at the sentence. He read it again, and again. It made no sense. Yet somehow it felt true. The final page contained only one instruction, written in larger letters: tomorrow go to Green Hollow Cemetery, Section 9, at exactly 3 o'clock, don't go because of the photograph, go because of me. Nothing else, no explanation, no goodbye. Only Arthur's signature, and beneath it one final line, a sentence so faint that Evan almost missed it. Some inherit money, you inherited a question. Evan folded the letter carefully. He looked toward the hallway closet. The witness remained silent, for now. His eyes drifted to the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, Green Hollow Cemetery, Section 9. He had promised himself he would never allow another photograph to control his life, yet here he was planning his entire day around one. He hated the realization, because Samuel had been right. The camera didn't force people to obey, it simply waited until they chose to. At 2:47 that afternoon, someone knocked on his apartment door. 3 slow knocks, not loud, not urgent. Evan opened it. No one stood in the hallway, only a small cardboard box rested on the floor, no shipping label, no return address. Inside, there was a single object, a small silver pocket watch. Its hands had stopped. Exactly at 3:00, tucked beneath it lay a folded note, one sentence, written in Arthur's handwriting. Don't be late. Evan slowly looked toward the hallway closet. Behind the closed door, he heard the familiar sound. Click. Evan woke before sunrise. He hadn't really slept. Not because he was afraid. Somewhere during the past week, fear had quietly transformed into something else. Fantation. Every photograph, every letter, every conversation, every step had been leading him toward this day. 3 o'clock Green Hollow Cemetery, the open grave. For the first time since inheriting the witness, he stopped wondering how to escape tomorrow. He simply wanted to see what it had been trying to show him. Morning arrived beneath a cloudless sky. After nearly a week of relentless rain, the city looked strangely alive. Sunlight shimmered in puddles that still covered the sidewalks. Children laughed on their way to school. Traffic flowed normally. People hurried through their ordinary lives. Only Evan felt disconnected from it all. It was as if everyone else still belonged to today, while he had been living in tomorrow for far too long. He made coffee, read Arthur's letter one final time, then walked to the hallway closet. He stood there for almost a minute. Finally he opened the door. The leather case rested exactly where he had left it, untouched, silent. He lifted it carefully. This ends today, he whispered. The camera offered no reply. He arrived at Green Hollow Cemetery 20 minutes before 3. The parking lot was nearly empty. Only a handful of cars remained. A black hearse stood near the entrance. Evan froze. He had seen it before, not in real life. In one of the photographs, he slowly followed the stone pathway deeper into the cemetery. Wet leaves rustled beneath his shoes. A gentle breeze moved through the ancient oak trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed across the hills. Each toll sounded slower than the last, almost as if time itself had begun to hesitate. Section 9. He found it almost immediately. Several people stood silently beneath black umbrellas. A priest, 2 men in dark suits, a police cruiser parked nearby, and the open grave. Evan stopped walking. Every detail matched the photograph: the fresh earth, the wooden coffin, the black umbrellas, even the old stone bench beside the path stood exactly where he remembered seeing it. His heart pounded. This was it, the moment he had feared since the camera first showed him the grave. He took another slow step forward, then another. Without realizing it, he stopped. Exactly where he had been standing in the photograph. His breathing became shallow, his hands trembled. He waited, he expected something terrible, a gunshot, a scream, someone pushing him into the grave, anything. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, nothing happened. The funeral continued peacefully, the priest quietly finished his prayer. No one looked at Evan, no one even noticed him. "Are you Evan Miller?" The soft voice startled him. He turned, an elderly woman stood beside him. She held a small wooden box wrapped in faded blue ribbon, her eyes were kind. "I was your grandfather's neighbor." She offered him the box. "Arthur asked me to give you this if you ever came here." Evan accepted it without speaking. It felt surprisingly light, something small shifted inside. He said, the woman smiled gently, "You would understand when the time came." Then she quietly walked away. The funeral slowly came to an end. People began leaving one by one. Within minutes, Evan stood alone beside the grave. Only then did he finally look at the headstone. His breath caught. The name carved into the polished granite wasn't the one he expected. Samuel Grayson, 19382-2026. Evan stared in disbelief. Samuel. Impossible. He had spoken to him yesterday. They had spent hours together inside the repair shop. Samuel had warned him, explained everything. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. He stepped backward, pulled out his phone, opened the map. Grayson camera repair. The same message appeared. Permanently closed. He searched local records. An obituary appeared. Samuel Grayson passed away 3 days ago after a brief illness. Evan's hands began to shake. 3 days ago, then who had he been talking to? A familiar voice drifted softly through the wind. "So, now you understand." Evan spun around. No one stood behind him, only empty pathways. Old trees, falling leaves. The cemetery had become completely silent. Slowly, he looked back at Samuel's grave. Arthur's words suddenly returned to him. The witness never shows death, it shows the moment when someone finally understands. The photograph had never promised Evan would die, it had only shown the place where everything would finally make sense, right here, beside this grave. With trembling hands, Evan opened the small wooden box. Inside lay a single photograph, old, faded. The corners had begun to curl with age. 4 people stood side by side, a young Samuel Grayson, Arthur Miller, an unfamiliar woman, and another man Evan didn't recognize. Each of them held the same camera. The witness. He turned the photograph over. Arthur's handwriting covered the back. "None of us ever owned it." Below that, another line. "We only believed we did." And beneath both one final sentence. "In the end, every owner becomes a witness." A cold wind swept through the cemetery. The last mourners disappeared beyond the gates. The silence felt endless. Then click. The sound came from inside the leather case. Evan closed his eyes. He didn't want to look, not yet. He already knew another photograph was emerging. Slowly he opened the case. A fresh print rested in his hand, completely white, warm. He watched as shadows slowly appeared across its surface. His own apartment, his kitchen, the table, the hallway. Everything perfectly still. Then on the wall above the table a framed photograph, his own portrait surrounded by a black mourning ribbon. Evan stopped breathing. Very slowly, letters appeared along the white border. Not tomorrow. This time only one word. Today. Evan couldn't take his eyes off the photograph. It showed his kitchen, the same kitchen he had left only a few hours earlier, the table, the window, the calendar hanging on the wall, the hallway closet, and his own portrait, framed in black mourning ribbon, along the white border. There was only one word. Today. His hands began to tremble. Slowly, he turned the photograph over. The back was blank, no message, no explanation, no clue, just white paper as always. The drive home passed in silence. Later, Evan realized he barely remembered it. He wasn't afraid of crashing, he wasn't even afraid of the camera anymore. He feared something far more dangerous. He feared misunderstanding it again. Samuel had been right. Every owner had made the same mistake. They never truly looked, they interpreted, and every interpretation was built from fear. When Evan unlocked the apartment door, he stopped in the hallway. The kitchen looked exactly as it had in the photograph. The table, the window, the calendar, the closet, everything, except one thing. There was no framed portrait hanging on the wall, no black ribbon, nothing. He placed the new photograph beside the witness. For the first time he made no attempt to understand it, he simply waited. Hours passed, nothing happened, no mysterious visitors, no strange phone calls, no new photographs. Evan made himself a cup of tea, then he sat by the window. For the first time in days he simply watched the world. Children laughed in the courtyard below, a man walked an old Labrador through the park, a woman hurried home carrying grocery bags. Life continued exactly as it always had, nothing extraordinary, nothing supernatural, only ordinary people living ordinary lives. Somewhere along the way he had stopped noticing them. Arthur's letter still rested on the table. Evan unfolded it once more. This time he wasn't searching for hidden meanings, he was simply reading. Then one sentence caught his attention, a sentence he had overlooked before. "I was afraid you would spend your life searching for answers instead of living it." Evan lowered the letter, a quiet realization settled over him. That was exactly what had happened. In less than 2 weeks he had stopped going to work, stopped answering friends, stopped calling his mother, stopped thinking about anything except tomorrow. The camera hadn't stolen his life. He had surrendered it willingly. A small smile appeared on his face, the first genuine smile in days. "So that's what you meant," he whispered. At that exact moment, click. The familiar sound echoed softly across the kitchen. Evan looked toward the table. Another photograph slowly emerged from the witness. This time he didn't rush, he waited quietly while the image developed. It showed the same kitchen, the same table, the same window, but one detail had changed. The black mourning portrait was gone, the wall was empty, just as it was now. Evan looked at the white border. No word appeared. Not tomorrow. Not today, nothing. For the first time since inheriting the camera, the border remained completely blank. He understood, the witness had nothing left to show him. Evan opened the leather case carefully, he lifted the old camera into his hands. He ran his fingers across the cracked black leather. "Dad, grandfather," he whispered with a quiet laugh. "You spent 30 years trying to understand this. Maybe the answer was never hidden inside the camera. Maybe it was hidden inside us." The apartment remained silent. He opened the back of the camera. It was empty. There was no film cartridge inside. He stared at it in disbelief. He knew he had never removed it, yet it was gone, as though it had never existed. He laughed, not nervously, not out of relief, but because, for the first time, he no longer needed an explanation. He gently closed the camera, placed it back inside its leather case, not as a cursed object, not as a miracle, simply as his grandfather's old camera. The following morning, Evan returned to work. His co-workers commented that he looked different, older, quieter, healthier. He smiled but offered no explanation. That evening, he called his mother. The weekend after that, he met friends for dinner. A month later, he drove into the countryside just to watch the sunset, without a camera, without expectations, without wondering what tomorrow might bring. For the first time in a long while, today was enough. Nearly a year passed. One rainy autumn afternoon, Evan finally finished sorting through the last of Arthur's belongings. At the bottom of an old wooden cabinet, he discovered a small box he had somehow missed. Inside lay Arthur's cleaning cloth, several faded photographs, and the black journal. Curious, Evan opened it to the final page. There, in Arthur's unmistakable handwriting, was a note he had never seen before. "If you're reading this, the camera no longer belongs to you, not because you lost it, because you stopped belonging to it. Now go live the life I forgot to live." Evan closed the journal, slowly, carefully. He looked out the window. The rain no longer reminded him of photographs, it was simply rain, and for the first time in a very long time, he realized he genuinely didn't care what tomorrow looked like. The doorbell rang, a single, ordinary chime. Evan opened the door. No one stood in the hallway. Only a small cardboard box rested on the floor, no postage, no return address, no name. He carried it inside, opened it. Inside was a familiar black leather case, brand new, without a single scratch. Embossed across the lid in silver letters, "The Witness." Evan looked at it for a long time, then very gently he closed the box again. Without opening the case, without touching the camera, he carried the package back into the hallway, set it beside the apartment door, and quietly said, "Choose someone else." He closed the door, the lock clicked, silence returned. He never looked through the peephole because some questions don't need answers, some mysteries don't need solving, and some tomorrows are best left unseen.